Nonprofit and philanthropic leaders devote their lives to the service of others, but sometimes they need a little help. Kristine Michie has been deep in the work and the play of helping changemakers grow their impact for decades. So whether you're ladling soup at a local shelter or attending a UN peace conference, you need to find the balance between the heavy work and a light touch so you don't burn out. And Kristine believes play is at the center of that. Welcome to the PlayFull Podcast, bringing fun to the serious work of changing the world.
Hey folks, Kristine here. We are treating you to what we're calling our YTD, year-to-date best of. There are 4 episodes. This is one of them that have been off the charts, the highest engagement that we've had in 2026. So sit down, enjoy these messages, these inspirations, and these conversations that are as relevant today as ever. And if you didn't hear them before, glad to share them with you now. Everybody, hi, welcome back to the PlayFull Podcast. We are bringing fun to the serious work of changing the world. Boy, do we need that right now. Boy, is it serious, and boy, do we need to bring fun to it. And Phil Buchanan is with us today. He's the CEO of the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Welcome, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Kristine, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, man. So you've been doing this 26 years, this specifically working at CEP. I always wanted to ask you this.
25.
What's different?
Not quite 25.
25.
Just, yeah.
Okay, 25. What's different and what's similar? I mean, I'm noticing, sometimes it's giving me solace to think of what's similar. Like we've been through this before and we survived it kind of thing. And then I'm like, don't fool yourself. It's different. And I'm wondering, like, where do you land on that? Or does that change even during the course of a day?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I don't think we've been through anything quite like this in my, career anyway, in my professional lifetime, in the sense that the nonprofit sector is under attack. And that's unprecedented, I think. And we were just having this conversation at our conference with, we were just having this conversation at our conference with a historian named Ben Soskis from the Urban Institute. And he was saying, look, let's be real and acknowledge that the federal government has gone after nonprofits before, for example, during the civil rights movement. But an open, outright attack on the sector with words like terrorist and NGOs being used in the same sentence, or the February 6th, Trump White House memo that talked about anti-American NGOs, or the notion that you would go after major institutional donors like Open Society Foundation for what is so obviously just ideologically based sort of indiscriminate discrimination, is the way Ben Soskis put it, against particular organizations because of their goals and objectives. I do think that's unprecedented. And the other point I would add about this is people compare this to the pandemic a lot. Nonprofits were reeling with decreases in revenue, particularly those that depended on earned revenue, and increases in demand. But the federal government was putting money into nonprofits during that time in a variety of ways, including through the forgivable PPP loans. Right now, the federal government is extracting money from nonprofits. So I think it's an unprecedented level of challenge, certainly at least in my professional career.
Yeah, I was talking with one of our colleagues yesterday, and we were talking about how that comparison, the pandemic was a not really a man-made crisis. It was a kind of a crisis of the moment and of to some degree nature and things like that.
Right.
And then the government came in as a problem solver partner versus this being a man-made crisis, government-made crisis, government-made. And gosh, Phil, you're right. Like the demonizing of the sector is just stunning and takes your breath away. And then you got to get your breath back because you got to keep going, right? So let me ask you, what are your resiliency practices that you're finding, maybe ones you've always had that you're using more, or new ones you're developing as both a person and as a leader, in this sort of sense of being able to have playfulness, joy, and love in your life so you can keep doing this hard work while buffeting these winds?
Yeah, it's such a good and hard question. For me personally, I was thinking about this. I was like slightly anxious about this podcast because I'm like, oh, I have to talk about like joy and fun and the things I do, outside work. And I'm not, like I've got two brothers I'm close to, and one of them in particular has all kinds of great like hobbies that help him unwind. Like he's a birder and a photographer and a biker, and he's got this big job. He's a judge in California, but he's got all these cool things that he does. And I don't really have that. I would say the thing that brings me joy is, spending time with my family, my wife and my two adult daughters. And, to an embarrassing degree, because I always made fun of people who said this. My dog. I love my dog. And we got her during the pandemic, and she gets me outside a lot. And we are fortunate to live in an area near a lot of trails and a lot, protected by nonprofits, conservation land. And getting out on trails, just walking with her is probably the best thing I can do for myself in terms of resiliency and just energy and fun. And she's a lot of fun and funny. And then in terms of as a leader, I mean, it's been a struggle, right? To figure out how to balance the fact that like there's great urgency to the work. The work has to look different. There's a lot of change that has to happen to be responsive to the context. We're trying to provide information to donors in a much more rapid turnaround way right now. It requires a lot from people. So how do you then make time rather uh, to provide people space to connect, to celebrate? So I think a lot of it is about the great people who work at CEP kind of following their energy. Like we have all kinds of goofy activities that folks do, fun things like, um, you know, we had flowers brought in and people did flower arrangements. We, do a lot with food. Like people really like to talk about food and to eat food and just creating time where we do that, fun Halloween stuff, whatever it is, just to celebrate the wins and make sure that you're recognizing the fact that people are working differently, and that's hard and that they are also personally affected in many cases by
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, specifically that example of the flower arranging, I've done that, and I in my firm Impactful, we do retreat facilitation, and our kind of the model of it is called provocative joy, and so we kind of like trying to bring in that tension between being provocative, being ambitious for change and impact, but also doing it joyfully, and I can remember a time when I thought, kind of like back to the 70s and things, the trust walks and the trust falls and all that.
Right.
Those are
Right.
even kind of made fun of when you watch TV shows and they're like, oh, the trust
Yeah.
walk. But boy, I think, community building, team building at this time when we need to kind of bolster each other, where we're not kind of all like, we're not all like sick on the same day. We can kind of like, sick and tired
Yes.
on the same day. We can support each other, is vital. And you mentioned the members, right? The philanthropists that are part of your organization and look to you for support and guidance. Tell us a little bit about those who aren't familiar about CEP. What is its
Sure.
model? Who's involved and how? And if anyone's listening, thinks, gosh, could I get involved? What would they need to know about what it means to be a member and how to become one?
Yeah, and so we technically don't have members. So we are serving donors, and that includes individual donors, but also traditionally our audience has been primarily institutional foundations, and then more recently we've broadened out some of our resources for individual donors. And we do a lot of research that's just intended to inform people. So, for example, right now we are repeatedly surveying a representative panel of nonprofits, and elevating what are the issues nonprofits are experiencing that donors need to understand so they can do something about it.
Great.
We're also tracking foundations' response to the current context. We do research on things like what this was the most I think fun research project I've worked on in my career, looking at the effects of Mackenzie Scott's massive unrestricted gifts on the organizations that received them. How did they spend the money? What were the unintended consequences, positive, negative, otherwise? So those are the kind of things we do in terms of our research agenda. Then we also have a whole client-facing side of what we do that's mostly working with foundations, but also other grant-making institutions. A lot of that is about helping them actually hear from key constituencies, including the nonprofits they support through something called the Grantee Perception Report, which allows them to understand the experience of the nonprofits they fund. Because as you know well, the power dynamic is such that big funders tend to be surrounded by people who might not tell them what they really think, right? And so we've created various mechanisms to gather that feedback, candid and comparative feedback, and provide it to funders. We have a bunch of different kinds of advisory services for donors and funders. We have other resources like programming, blog, podcast called Giving Done Right, that's really aimed at individual donors to help them think about how to be effective in their giving. And then the last thing I'll mention is we have an initiative at CEP that has a interesting origin story that I won't get into, but it came out of our relationship with the Gates Foundation. It's called Youth Truth, and it's a youth survey in high schools, elementary, and middle schools. And the audience there is a little bit different than our other work. It's partly education funders, but it is also school districts and school leaders. And we've surveyed millions of young people through that project. So it's a lot of data and survey-based work. The headline is we're trying to help people to be more effective in their philanthropy, and then also part of it is just to inspire people to give more, which is so important right now, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, this will air a couple weeks later, but today's Giving Tuesday, so it's a great day to be having this conversation. And in your kind of in the blurb about CEP, it specifically calls out, right, a provider of data and insight on philanthropic effectiveness. And I feel like people may not understand that there's a lot more than philanthropy than just the feeling and the good feeling that comes from it. And the good feeling can come from it is magnified when you can also, quote unquote, prove its effectiveness and the effectiveness of the work. Like you over these, got to experience this, we're in that pendulum swinging moment, over the last 5-6 years. So much of the work that I got to be a part of was centering, Black, Latino, Indigenous populations, specifically vocally, loudly, proudly, and other marginalized, historically excluded groups. And, and then there was assessment after that of how much of that was just talk, how much of it was action, and some, kind of measuring around that. And then now this thing around, like, what do we say and not say? Well, we'll do the same work. We're just not going to talk about it that way. Curious about when that's needed. I was looking at, you had a blog up today in honor of Giving Tuesday, and man, you quoted everybody from, Frederick Douglass to Carmen Rojas to the guy from UTEC, one of your a nonprofit that you support. They're close to you in Massachusetts. And some of the discussion was around, kind of how philanthropy is responding, who's scrubbing their language, who's doing the work, who's retreating, and who's leaning in. If you had to give the sector a grade right now, what would you give it?
Oh, that is a hard question. So let me start with just a little bit of grounding in the fact that
Please.
we fielded a survey in August and September of our representative panel of nonprofits. We saw that at that time, significant numbers of organizations were reporting that they'd already experienced cuts in federal funding. Let me just find the data.
Right.
So it was, of course, now I can't, but it was about a third that had experienced a cut in federal funding. A number of significant percentages were expecting to, but hadn't yet. 29% had already reduced staff, and another 23% expected that they would have to. So that's a majority when you put those two together. Fully 35% said that they're concerned about the well-being and safety of their staff or board in this context. Folks talked about being under pressure to reframe public descriptions of their work. 81% of nonprofits said that they'd experienced increased demand for their services. And fully 61% of nonprofits said that the current context poses moderate to significant risk for them to continue to operate. So this is
say that percent again, Phil.
61% of nonprofits, 61% of nonprofits said the current context poses moderate to significant risk for them to continue to operate. So that's where we are. And so I feel like evaluating the response of philanthropy, and particularly big institutional philanthropy, which is what I know best, has to be done in the context of understanding that that is what nonprofits are experiencing. And in that context, I wouldn't give super high marks. I would say that some foundations have stepped up and been amazing. They've stepped up their spending levels. They have spoken out in helpful ways. They have stood by their grantees. And so there are significant numbers, who have done that. And I think that's terrific and that they should be celebrated. And it's perhaps, at some level, career suicide for me to say this, but a lot of folks, I think, have done less than they should have. And these are folks that are, in some cases, people we're pretty close to, right? But where 30% said when we surveyed foundations that they'd increase their payout relative to what they had budgeted initially for 2025, 30%. Well, I don't know. What are you waiting for, right? And I understand that the fiduciary responsibility, some of these institutions are managed to exist in perpetuity. I get that. But when you look at investment returns, when you look at what's going on for nonprofits, I think that's a surprisingly low number. And I think that a number have retreated from work that they didn't have to retreat from, or statements that they didn't have to retreat from, because there's nothing illegal. As our board chair, Tony Richardson, president of the Gun Foundation, said at our conference a few weeks ago, our values are not illegal. And so I think there's been a lot of fear and anxiety that has pushed people to step back in ways that are harmful. Now, all that said, I want to recognize everybody's situation is different. Everybody's operating with different constraints, different boards. It can be hard to convince your board if you're leading a foundation to do more. And so I get that. I want to be generous in that way. So I don't want to boil it all down to a letter grade, but I think that philanthropy is going to need to do more. Otherwise, what's going to happen? It's a lot of nonprofits that are providing vital services to people who desperately need them in communities aren't going to be there anymore. And who's going to suffer? People in those communities. And so I think we just have to step up.
Yeah, I mean, what are we waiting for? Absolutely. Glenn Galich, who I'm sure you know well, has been on the podcast twice and does not mince words, right? And certainly shared as many have those same frustrations. I think he said, if you're waiting for a rainy day, is a tsunami enough, right? Has that got your attention, right?
Yep.
When you're kind of bringing kind of this thought back around playfulness, right? Creativity. We talk a lot with guests about imagination, which is a close cousin or even maybe just sibling to play and playfulness. People in our sector, people lucky like us to do this work, even and especially when it's hard, we've got to be imaginative. We couldn't imagine a better world. We wouldn't do this work, right? Where are you finding inspiration for new ideas? And how do you feel about we shouldn't try and fix anything that we had before. It wasn't working anyways. And this building something brand new, imagining that you and I might talk in months or a year from now and say, be describing something that today we probably couldn't even picture as part of the solution. What does that conjure up for you? Any of those thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that nonprofits operating nonprofits, folks on the receiving end of gifts from foundations and donors are showing a lot of creativity and resilience because they have to, right? Yeah. They have to. So they're doing less with more. They're partnering in different ways, collaborating in different ways. Some of them are exploring mergers. And I think that there's a lot of creativity there. I think among some funders, there's been real creativity in how to facilitate some of those activities, how to help nonprofits with threats that none of us would have been able to anticipate. I struggle a little bit with this question of, well, yeah, but it wasn't working. Well, true. Um, but this is not the path forward for reform, right? So I do think we have to imagine what might be possible, when we get through this period, and I believe we will get through this. And we have to imagine what's possible, but we also have to protect what we can. That's good
Mm-hmm.
and important. I was on a Zoom with a group of Australian foundation CEOs in March or April, who were remarkably well informed about what was going on in the U.S. and very concerned about it, and asked me a lot of good questions. And one of them said, and I understand where he was coming from. Look, international development. This is the dismantling of USAID was very much in the news at that time. International development, it wasn't working as well as it should have. So what do you say about that, Phil? And I'm like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you blow up things that are literally saving lives, right? Like millions of people will die who don't have to die. I don't think that's an overstatement over the years from some of the things that have happened. So it was again, I was talking to Australians, so it was like 10:30 my time, and it had been a long day. And I couldn't think of a good analogy. And so I don't know why I'm repeating it, because it's not a great analogy. But the thing that came out of my mouth in that moment was my wife and I spend a lot of time looking at our little backyard and saying, we're not really making the most of this backyard. It's kind of sad looking, and there's a lot of weeds, you know, but that doesn't mean that she'd be super psyched if she came home and I'd blown it up with dynamite, right?
Right. Right.
And ruined
Right.
everything, including what was good about it and what we liked about it. So I don't
Yeah.
really, I've seen some things written by people I respect about well, let's talk about all the opportunity in this. I, I, I think we got to deal with all the loss, and we got to deal with trying
Yeah.
to protect what we can, even as we try to imagine a better future. And, to the other part of your comment or question, you know, wh- I mean, about the creativity and joy as we do this, I just think we got to keep the people front and center, the people who
Yeah.
are impacted. And I think that gets lost in this conversation. Our nonprofit sector historically has been valued for its diversity, right? So I'm constantly quoting George Bush Sr. this year, who said,
Yeah. Yeah.
community organizations are, um, you know, a broad diversity spread like stars, like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. I got that slightly wrong, but mostly right. And John Gardner, who was a Democrat, said, "Hey, if you haven't found a nonprofit institution you seriously disrespect, then something's wrong with our pluralism." And the point is that there's every kind of organization serving every kind of person in various ways. And, I just think as some of these cuts play out, and we see more and more folks in communities in red states and blue states, in cities and rural areas, who are suffering as a result of not getting the meals they depend on, or not being able to engage with the arts and culture organizations that had previously existed. That's what it's about. It's about people and communities suffering. And I think we got to do everything we can to counter that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was when you were sharing about the McKinsey Scott work you guys got to do. I just want to put a smile on my face because two of my clients that I do consulting with received 7 and 8 figure gifts from McKinsey Scott, and that was a really amazing moment to be a part of and to see how they used it differently. And one of them in particular. Really robustly funded kind of a professional development budget that was heavy on mental health supports, retreats, sabbaticals, some of that trust walk, trust building, all that kind of stuff. that and they have maintained that emphasis, and that was really exciting to see. And I think I posted something about, I think I posted something on LinkedIn about, can grant dollars pay for massages? I kind of boiled it down to like, if you were on this retreat and there was a massage, could you get one? Could you like have that vegan meal that you don't usually get to have because you go to this cool retreat, and kind of like, yes, right? What are all the different ways we can treat and support each other, right, in this moment, and all of it towards, kind of our mutual, like, resourcing, right, collectively resourcing with each other. Okay, I don't know if that was a good segue to, but it could be. I think it often is. You just kind of make it so to ice cream. So
yeah,
feel free, if you would, go step aside to get your ice cream out of the freezer. And I'm going to give a little shout out to a couple of our ice cream sponsors. So today, Phil and I are both having Ben & Jerry's, which has been a sponsor of the podcast over the years. And our ongoing main title sponsor for the ice cream is Taharka Brothers, based in Baltimore, and they are they ship nationwide. It's a great holiday gift to send people 6 pints of ice cream in a hot pink box, and I'm going to follow up with Phil and make sure he gets some of that as well. So everybody, thank you. And I talk often about how in bridge building in our sector, we can look for a third thing. And bridge building just in society, right? That not everything is binary and polarized and red versus blue and progressive versus conservative. And the magic of finding a third thing, something you have in common with somebody that's not controversial. And I offer up to all of you that ice cream might be one of those things, as can be hobbies like tennis, or pets like people who love French bulldogs. So that third thing concept is something that has also come up a lot in the podcast over the last couple of years. Okay, so Phil, you're back with your ice cream, and I have a little cooler here right by my side. I'm gonna zipper that open, and let's talk about what kind of ice cream we're having. Oh, you're on mute. Okay, editing team, we'll start now. I'm going to count down again. 3, 2, 1. All right, Phil, we are back with our ice cream. I wonder what you chose.
I chose chocolate chip cookie dough.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm pretty excited about it. Yeah. Yeah,
a longtime favorite. And I've got the Ben & Jerry's Lights Caramel Action. And this is Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker. This is her, cool. They did a collab with her. She is a fantastic filmmaker and a real impact expert and celebrity in our field. Okay, so let's have a bite.
Wait, she did Selma, right? Yeah. I just watched that.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah,
I've watched it for a while. I'll be going to cue back up.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is non-dairy, which is fun. And I'll tell you, that's about a third of my guests have asked for non-dairy over this time.
Really?
Non-dairy ice cream with salted caramel swirls, graham cracker swirls, and gobs of chocolate chip cookie dough. And yours is pretty straightforward, right?
It's straightforward, but it's my favorite. I love chocolate chip cookie dough from Ben & Jerry's. So I'm happy. Okay. I'm not being very adventuresome, admittedly, but.
And I noticed that you actually served yours in a bowl, which is very impressive. I just eat right out of the carton.
Well, here's the thing. I'm in the office and I'm thinking like maybe others will want some ice cream. And so I probably should just eat out of the bowl. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's showing good restraint. I like that.
If I were at home, now, it would be a different story.
Right? I mean, I have all these, since I'm an ice cream, it's like kind of ice cream is my thing now, my brand.
Yeah.
People give me ice cream scoops a lot, but I don't really have a lot of use for ice cream scoops because I just usually serve myself out of the cart.
Right. There you go. Well, and I feel like it's good that we're having ice cream because we should be celebrating what is a very big day for you because you're a grandma, you told me, as of like today, right? Which is incredible.
Okay, this is true, you guys. Let's this will, like I said, this will air later, but let me state, this is the first podcast I've ever done as a grandmother. It is the 2nd of December as we're recording this, and I became a grandma this morning at 9:25 a.m. At this moment, I don't know his name yet. The mom and dad, my daughter and her husband haven't yet shared that. If it comes in on a text while we're recording, I'll announce it to the world.
Absolutely.
But he was 7 pounds 1 ounce, and of course he's quite handsome, and I think he's going to change the world.
He is going to change the world. Yeah. Yeah. That is awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for mentioning it. It's fun. So, oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah,
So, Phil,
I bet you are.
tell me, when we eat ice cream, I like to ask the question, what's the scoop on how you came to care? A bit of like a impact origin story. What do you remember about an early moment where you kind of looked up and realized the world was bigger than just you and your family or the people on your block, and that you felt a responsibility to engage in the world and making the world better?
Yeah. I mean, I think quite early on, my dad kind of introduced me to that fact that the world is a lot bigger than just our family. And he was super politically active. And so I was not alive when he like participated in a lunch counter sit-in 1960 or 61, I forget, in Durham, North Carolina, protesting, segregation and Jim Crow. And then when I was alive in the 70s, he was always protesting one thing or another, including doing rather radical things like lying on the train tracks where they carried the nuclear warheads up to Washington State because he was a big anti-nuclear weapon sort of protester. And he would also take me to protests. He didn't, have me lie across the train tracks, don't worry. But and I just think it opened my eyes to, the idea that there's a lot of injustice, but also the idea that like we all have both an opportunity and a responsibility to try to do something to make the world better as we see it. And, so I think, and then I think like a lot of people, I was maybe took those lessons even more into my heart after he died quite out of the clear blue sky when I was 14. And I think that his sort of perspective on the world really shaped me, maybe more than it would have actually if that hadn't happened. Yeah.
Wow, yes. I can share and relate, and can report that many of the guests similarly had some really early exposure, and not surprisingly a lot of family history and activism, etc. When I started the podcast, I thought that my first political campaign was 1972, walking door to door for George McGovern, but then my mom and dad told me that actually we walked door to door for Tom Bradley in 1968 when he ran for mayor of LA the first time. Didn't win that time, but did, yeah. And boycotting grapes is a very, very vivid memory for me, and growing up in the 70s here in California and supporting the farm workers. And my grandmother was arrested protesting U.S. involvement in El Salvador at a sit-in in City Hall in downtown LA when I was in high school. So I am so proud to have and grateful that I grew up with that, with a worldview, right? And then was blessed with a career. I've gotten to make a living doing this work, and bringing us here today, which. And I always have thought, Phil, and I think in this moment, it's important for me to remember, and I'm happy to share if this can buoy people's spirits. I mean, there's way more good people than bad. There's way more people who care about others than don't. And people will then also say, yeah, the news and the media, they only focus on the bad stuff, well, kind of curate your news feed, right? And
absolutely.
This podcast and your podcast and these other avenues, like there are people out there telling stories of hope. There are out there people lifting up these voices, and I just want to meet as many good people as I can, while I'm on the planet, and that's why I do the podcast.
Yeah, and I, the other thing I think, kind of in that vein to remember, is that, like, in the broad sweep of history, there have been plenty of times when folks have been challenged and really had to step up. We had, and I know he's a sort of, people have a lot of strong opinions on him, but I think he's a very thoughtful, smart guy. We had Ezra Klein speak at our conference, and then we put it out as an episode of our podcast. And, he was making that point, right? Like when you think about the other challenges, even just, in the 20th century, like civil rights and ending Jim Crow or the Red Scare or any number of other the Great Depression moments, and that as he put it, like this civil society, like were we just there for the good times, like, or are we going to step up now, and so I think maybe some of us, I mean, I would say like it also reminds me our board chair said, um, Tony Richardson, who I mentioned before from the Gun Foundation, who's pretty young to be the CEO of a big foundation. He's a 42-year-old black guy, and he said at our conference, that sense of unease, that a lot of you are feeling for the first time. I've lived with that my whole life, and I think like having the perspective to recognize, like for myself, that yeah, this has been unsettling because it's been a pretty comfortable, few decades, particularly for someone like me. But like, let's put it in perspective here in terms of the challenges that others face every day, faced recently, and that many of us have, many of our ancestors have faced historically. So I don't know, that's kind of a ramble, but like we have to recognize that we got, if we're working in these jobs, we've chosen them for a reason, and now is the time to step up.
Yeah, I totally relate. I mean, I've had the experience in the last, since the inauguration and increasingly since, when I see a cop car now, I have a completely different reaction. I wonder who they're going after, right?
Mm-hmm.
I,
Right.
I still don't have to wonder if they're going after me, which is different, but I am
Right.
aware that I don't, when I see, I mean, honestly, when I see police now, I don't think, oh, there's the good guys. I mean, I've already questioned that during the last 5, 6 years, especially,
Yeah.
but even more so now when I've actually witnessed, raids and things like that in my community. And I am reminded again of all my privilege and my ability to kind of move about the world safely, with so many friends and colleagues who don't have the privilege that, basically just the color of my skin affords. And so
Right.
I'm seeking continued deepening understanding of that. And, my sort of like, we're just finishing up a series. I'm sorry, we're just starting a series. I finished recording, but it's going to start this week, called Thoughts and Prayers. And it's about interfaith dialogue as a tool for this time. And so I found myself talking about God and Jesus on the podcast, which if you would have asked me a couple of years ago, if that was my plan, I've thought, oh, I don't think we're going to be doing that. And we have been. I've been reaching out to interfaith leaders of all different denominations, talking about how, and it was Robert Rabin from Rabin Group was the one who brought it to my attention. He said, I think the progressive left is eschewing spirituality as a tool for the movement, kind of not only not necessarily, but like it could be really smart to start trying to figure out how to bring more conversation about faith and spirituality into the movement more broadly. So I've been having a lot of those conversations, which has been really, and I've been thinking about, kind of my prayer is, like, God, please help me know my role. Like, what's my role, broadly, and what's my role today? How can I show up today to be a good ally, to be a good activator, and to be a real, a provider of hope and opportunity and impact.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so much in what you just said that was great. I mean, and I do think it's odd that we sometimes overlook the role of faith and faith-based organizations in our history of social progress. I mean, people also rightly, I think, point to the ways in which organized religion has sometimes created, problems, right? And I'm not a particularly religious person myself, but like we have to. I do think that progressives sometimes discount that. And it's an incredibly powerful motivator of giving and connector of people. And we need to understand that as the important part of like the change ecosystem, that it is. And then to your point about privilege, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it is really on display right now. And I mean, I thought about this in the context. So I mentioned my dad having been in a protest against segregation in North Carolina. He was on a student visa. I don't think he particularly worried for himself what would happen, right? Again, he was a white guy, relatively privileged, middle class, upper middle class family. But I thought about that when Romesa Ostürk, the Tufts graduate student, it's about 20 minutes from where I am right now, was pulled into a van while on the phone with her mother, walking out of her house where she lived right near the Tufts campus, because she was one of 4 co-authors of an op-ed that questioned the Tufts University administration's stance with respect to Israel in the United States of America, and she ends up in a detention facility for months in Louisiana. I mean, she's free now and back on the Tufts campus, thanks to incredible legal work by a variety of different folks. But that, that happened this year, and so much, so many people have been detained without any due process, and are detained right now. In my view, I'm not a lawyer, but illegally, unconstitutionally, inhumanely, and those of us. I mean, to me, that's what needs to compel those of us who have any kind of privilege or power, whatever our background is, to use it for good and to get over our own fears, whatever they may be, because folks are depending on us to do that right now.
Yes. What am I willing to risk, right? What privilege am I willing to risk, right? What discomfort, right? As others are are getting to choose whether or not they're going to risk something. They are, for example, grabbing off the street. Wow. So, can you come up with a call to action for the audience that you'd like to leave us with? These are mostly, full-time change makers, whether they're in the nonprofit leadership roles or anywhere in the organization or in the philanthropic roles, kind of those, or the academic and the think tanks and all of that. What you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think everybody's got different assets that they can bring to this moment, right? But take stock of what those are, like what you can do, and then do the thing. One of the leaders I really admire in philanthropy, and full disclosure, they're a funder and a client of ours, but is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation CEO, Rich Besser. And I know him a little bit, but I haven't talked to him this year. But he's been out there, like, really vocal and really effective, I think, in making the case. And my guess is that he took stock of what he could bring to the fight, right? Like, he had run the CDC on an interim basis. He's running the biggest, health-focused foundation in the world. He was on a TV morning news show, right? So he knows how to go on TV. He's a pretty telegenic kind of dude. He's super good speaker. And so he's just like, fuck it. These are my, he's just like, to heck with it. These are my assets. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out there, and he's not been afraid to, speak up for their values. He's not been afraid to speak up for diversity, equity, and inclusion, for racial equity, for, the fact that health outcomes are linked to identity factors in a way that they shouldn't be in the future. Like, he's just not backed down. I can't be him. I'm not as good on TV, I'm sure, as he is. But what can I bring, right? Like, what is the thing that I can do? And then just do it to the max. And then from a giving perspective, to the extent that you have folks in your audience who are donors, really question, like, is this a time I can dig a little deeper? And again, like, make some sacrifices, given the sacrifices that we see others not choosing to make, but being forced into. So I guess that's my call to action. Like, this is the time to step up. And I think somebody said to me on a Zoom, and for some reason it really got to me. She was a program officer at a big foundation, and she was telling me that, she's trying to do everything she could, and that it was relatively risk-averse institution she was working in. But within that, she was trying to do everything she could. And she had 2 little kids running around behind her. And she was working from home, and she was apologizing for this. And she said to me, I think about them being old enough to ask me, Mom, what did you do during that period?
What did you do?
and I want to have a good answer for them. And for some reason, like it just completely got to me when she said that, because I think that's right, because we all want to be able to look back and say, look, we did everything we could.
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna leave us with one thing. This is like from the '90s. Stephen Covey, you remember that, like leadership guru guy?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
think,
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah, and I think there's 3 circles. There's a smallest circle was your circle of control. What can you control? The next one out is circle of influence. Where do you have influence? And then the largest one is circle of concern. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, okay, and to your point, like take stock. What do I have control over? And regarding the movement, regarding protecting democracy, regarding protecting the nonprofit sector, what can I control? All right, and then go out to my influence. Okay, that's a little bit more. There's places where I've got some influence. The podcast can be influential, things like that, working with my clients. And then circle of concern, what I love about that is you and I are in that circle of concern together with Barack Obama, with Ezra Klein, with Richard Besser, with Carmen Rojas. We're sharing that circle of concern. They have influence and control in areas where I only have concern. And if you think about the weaving of that collectively, we're in those different circles and kind of covering a lot of territory in aggregate. And that kind of calls me to find my role and calls me to stay in communion and fellowship with everybody in those other circles.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you, Stephen Covey. Hope I quoted that right.
Yeah. And I think one thing that literally pretty much everybody can do, and I know people put themselves at different amounts of risk based on who they are when they do this, but pretty much everybody can show up, outside the ICE detention facility where people are being detained in inhumane conditions, for example, like we can do those things as citizens. We have the ability to do those things, even if we don't have money, we don't feel we have like institutional, authority or power. There's still things that we can all do.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna put us on the calendar to do this again in 6 months, and I hope we're gonna have some updates and some brag-worthy successes. Not our personal, but for all those that we care about. And I really am just glad to know you better and really grateful for the work that CEP is doing. Thank you for your leadership at this time. And tell us your dog's name before we sign off.
Nella.
Thank God for Nella. I love it. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I look at my pet and I think, oh, you're so lucky. You don't know what's going on, right?
Totally.
So enjoy her exuberance.
Thank you, Kristine.
Thank you so much, Phil. So thanks for being. All right. Cheers. Thanks everybody for bringing fun to the serious work of change in the world today. Great. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to the PlayFull Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know of a leader or organization that's doing good in the world and you'd love to help us help them amplify their message, I would love to have them on the show. Go to the show notes and click there, or go to impactfulinc.com/contact. And that's impactful with 2 L's, inc.com/contact. And let us know who you're thinking about. Can't wait to see you next time.